I watched my sister Mira's face drain of color as Ethan's arm tightened around my waist. She stood in the doorway of our family's living room, her mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air, clutching her phone so hard her knuckles went white. "You!" she finally managed, her voice shrill. "You can't, he wouldn't—" "Mira, this is Ethan Chen," I said, letting my voice drip with saccharine sweetness. "My boyfriend. We've been together for 8 months now." "That's impossible," she hissed, taking a step forward. "I was supposed to—" She caught herself, but not fast enough. Mom appeared behind her, already frowning at me in that familiar way that said, "What have you done now, Lily?" "Supposed to what?" Ethan asked, his voice cool and polite. He didn't know the half of it. Didn't know that in another life, my first life, he'd never even looked at me twice. Didn't know that my sister had stolen his number from my phone, pretended to be me in texts, and orchestrated one of the most elaborate betrayals I'd ever experienced. But I knew. God, I knew. I remembered dying at 28, alone in a studio apartment I could barely afford. My heart giving out from the stress and malnutrition after Mira had taken everything, my job, my savings, even my identity in some ways. I remembered waking up at 16 again, in my childhood bedroom, with tears streaming down my face and 10 years of memories burning in my skull. I remembered everything, and this time, I'd changed the script. "Nothing," Mira said quickly, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I just didn't know Lily was seeing anyone. She's always been so private." Private. That was rich coming from her. Mom brushed past Mira, her eyes sweeping over Ethan with barely concealed interest. In my first life, she'd fawned over him when he'd shown up with Mira. The great Ethan Chen, son of the Chen technology dynasty, young genius programmer who'd sold his first app at 17 for 7 figures. Mom had practically planned their wedding before they'd even gone on a proper date. "I'm Sandra Liu, Lily's mother," Mom said, extending her hand. "This is certainly a surprise. Lily never mentioned she had a boyfriend." "That's because you never asked," I said, keeping my tone light but pointed. Ethan glanced at me, a flicker of something, concern, curiosity, crossing his face. In my first life, I'd been desperate for Mom's approval, for any scrap of attention she'd throw my way. I'd told her about Ethan the day after I'd met him at the university's computer science mixer, babbling about how funny and smart he was, how we'd talked for 3 hours about everything from code to philosophy. She'd smiled absently and gone back to helping Mira pick out a dress for a party. 2 days later, my phone had gone missing. I'd found it a week after that, tucked in Mira's room. By then, she'd already copied Ethan's number, had been texting him pretending to be me, sending photos she'd stolen from my computer. When I'd finally gotten his number back and tried to text him, he'd been cold, confused, said something about how different I seemed in person. The messages I'd supposedly sent him were flirtatious, provocative, nothing like how I actually talked. I'd tried to explain, but Mira had been cleverer. She'd created fake screenshots showing me talking about Ethan to friends, calling him a project, a challenge, saying I was only interested in his money. She'd shown them to him at a party I wasn't invited to, playing the concerned sister who couldn't stand to see her friend deceived. He'd believed her. Why wouldn't he? Sweet, beautiful Mira who everyone loved. They'd started dating a month later. I'd watched it all happen, helpless and heartbroken. But not this time. This time, when I'd woken up at 16, I'd understood something crucial. Mira's power over me only worked because I let it. Because I trusted her, gave her access to my life, my things, my secrets. Because I sought Mom's approval and Dad's attention, which made me vulnerable to their favoritism. This time, I'd locked my phone with a password Mira couldn't guess. This time, when I'd met Ethan at that same mixer, because some things, thank God, remained the same, I'd gotten his number myself and texted him immediately right there so he'd know my real number. I'd been bolder, funnier, more confident. I'd asked him out for coffee the next day. I'd kissed him first, on our 3rd date, under the campus oak tree. I'd been the one to make this relationship real, solid, before Mira even knew he existed. "Well," Mom said, still sizing up Ethan, "you should have told us. We could have had a proper dinner, not this ambush." "It wasn't meant to be an ambush," I said. Ethan wanted to meet my family. That was true. He'd been asking for weeks. I'd put it off as long as I could, knowing what was coming, but eventually I'd realized I couldn't avoid this confrontation forever. Better to control when and how it happened. I've heard a lot about you, Ethan said to Mom, his tone diplomatically neutral. To Mira, he nodded politely. And you must be the sister Lily mentioned. Mira's smile was glacial. All good things, I hope. She said you were very ambitious, Ethan replied. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Mira's eyes flashed dangerously. Dad emerged from his study, drawn by the commotion. In my first life, he'd been largely absent, buried in his work as a mid-level executive, too tired to notice the dynamics playing out in his own home. When Mira had needed money for her business ventures that were really just shopping sprees and parties, he'd given it to her. When I'd asked for help with college tuition after they'd somehow forgotten to file my financial aid paperwork, he'd told me to get a job. What's all this noise? He asked, then stopped when he saw Ethan. Oh, we have a guest. This is Ethan, Dad, I said. My boyfriend. I watched the calculation happen in real time across his face. Dad was a pragmatist above all else. The name Chen would have registered immediately, impossible not to, in our city's tech circles. Chen, Dad repeated. Not the Chen Tech family? My father's company, yes, Ethan confirmed, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. He'd told me once, late at night with his head in my lap, how exhausting it was to be reduced to his family name, his inheritance, his connections. How people looked at him and saw dollar signs instead of a person. That's why he'd been so drawn to me, I think. In both lives, I'd never cared about his money. I'd liked his terrible jokes, his passion for elegant code, the way he'd get so absorbed in explaining a concept that he'd talk with his hands and forget to eat. In my first life, that hadn't been enough. Mira had poisoned the well too quickly. But this time, I'd had 8 months to build something real with him. 8 months for him to know me, truly know me, before my family could sink their claws in. Why don't you stay for dinner? Mom said suddenly, her voice brightening in that way it did when she wanted something. I insist. We have so much to talk about. We actually have reservations at Lumiere, I said quickly. Lumiere was the French restaurant where Ethan had first told me he loved me 3 months into our relationship. I'd nearly cried, not just from happiness, but from the relief of having something pure and untouched by my family's poison. But maybe another time. Cancel them, Mom said, and it wasn't a suggestion. Family is more important than some restaurant. I felt Ethan's hand find mine, squeezed gently. We can reschedule, he murmured, and I could tell he was trying to be accommodating, to make a good impression. He didn't understand yet. Didn't know that dinner with my family wasn't a bonding experience, it was a battlefield. But I did, and I was ready. The thing about living your life twice is that you remember the small details, the building blocks of your own destruction. I remembered every slight, every manipulation, every moment of gaslighting and favoritism. I remembered Mom praising Mira's mediocre paintings while ignoring my academic awards. I remembered Dad taking Mira to father-daughter dinners while telling me he was too busy. I remembered every time they'd chosen her over me, believed her lies over my truth, funded her dreams while calling mine impractical. But most of all, I remembered how it had started. The foundation of their abuse was laid over years, carefully constructed from thousands of small moments that taught me I was less important, less loved, less worthy. They'd favored Mira since we were children. She was prettier, more charming, more like Mom. I was bookish, awkward, too intense. I asked difficult questions. I didn't perform femininity the right way. By the time I was a teenager in my first life, I'd internalized it completely. I'd believed I deserved less. That's why Mira's theft of Ethan, while devastating, hadn't surprised me. Of course she'd get the guy I liked. Of course she'd win. That's what always happened. The abuse escalated in my early 20s. Mira had dropped out of college, burned through her trust fund on a series of failed ventures and expensive tastes. She'd needed money. I'd been working at a startup, finally making decent money, finally finding my footing. She'd asked to borrow $5,000 for emergency dental work. I'd given it to her, and she'd used it to throw a party. When I'd confronted her, she'd cried to Mom and Dad. Said I was being cruel, that she'd paid me back weeks ago. She hadn't. That I was jealous of her relationship with Ethan. They'd believed her. They'd always believed her. It had gone on like that. She'd forged my signature to take out a loan in my name. She'd stolen my identity to open credit cards. She'd gotten me fired from my job by showing up at my office pretending to be me. We looked enough alike that she'd pulled it off and acting erratically, insulting my boss. By the time I died at 28, I'd lost everything. My savings, my credit, my career, my home. Even Ethan, who'd married her by then, hadn't known the full extent of what she'd done. He'd thought I was the unstable one, the jealous sister who couldn't be happy for them. I'd died alone, broken, with nothing and no one. But death had given me a gift, a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Dinner was exactly as excruciating as I'd anticipated. Mom cooked her special meal, the one she usually reserved for important guests or Mira's achievements. She'd never cooked it for me, not even when I'd won the state science fair or gotten a full scholarship to university. "So, Ethan," Mom said as she served the braised short ribs, "how did you and Lily meet?" "At a CS mixer," he said, smiling at me. "She destroyed me in a debugging competition. I'd never seen anyone work through code that fast." "Lily's always been good with computers," Dad said dismissively, as if it were a quirk rather than a valuable skill. "Mira's more of a people person. She's got such a gift for connecting with others." Mira preened at the compliment, tossing her hair. She'd been shooting me venomous looks all evening, but keeping up her sweet facade around Ethan. I knew what she was doing, cataloging, planning. She thought she still had time to drive a wedge between us. She didn't know I'd already told Ethan weeks ago that my family could be difficult. I'd framed it carefully, not wanting to seem like I was slandering them, but planting seeds. "They have a very clear favorite," I'd said, "and it's not me." He'd kissed my forehead and told me that said more about them than me. "Lily mentioned you're working on a new project," Ethan said to Mira, either trying to be polite or genuinely curious. I hadn't actually mentioned any such thing, but Mira latched onto the opening like a lifeline. "Oh, yes," she gushed. "I'm developing a lifestyle brand. Sustainable fashion meets social media influence. I've already got 15,000 followers on Instagram." In my first life, this lifestyle brand had been one of the ventures she'd funded by stealing from me. It had lasted 6 months before collapsing. The sustainable fashion had been cheap clothes from fast fashion websites that she'd marked up 300%. "That sounds interesting," Ethan said politely. "What's your differentiation strategy? The influencer market is pretty saturated." Mira blinked. "Well, people connect with authenticity, you know? Real stories, real style." "Sure, but what's your sustainable supply chain? Are you manufacturing in-house or working with ethical suppliers? What's your price point versus cost of goods?" I watched Mira flounder, struggling to answer basic business questions she hadn't considered. In my first life, she'd never needed to. She'd just thrown money at problems until they went away or abandoned projects when they got hard. "I'm still in the planning phases," she finally said, her voice tight. "Of course," Ethan said smoothly, taking a bite of his food. "These things take time. Lily's always telling me about her 5-year plan for her career. She's incredibly strategic." I felt warmth bloom in my chest. I'd been planning, yes, but not just my career. I'd been planning this. "Lily can be very single-minded," Mom said, and there was an edge to her voice. "Sometimes too focused on work and not enough on relationships. I'm surprised you've lasted this long, honestly. She tends to push people away." The accusation hung in the air. It was a classic move. Plant doubt disguised as concern. Make Ethan question whether I was worth the effort. "That's strange," Ethan said, his voice cooling noticeably. "I've found her incredibly attentive and emotionally available. Some of the best conversations I've ever had have been with her." He looked at me, his expression softening. "She makes me want to be a better person." I saw Mira's jaw clench, saw Mom's lips thin into a line. "Well, young love," Dad said dismissively, "give it time." "We plan to," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. In my first life, I would have looked away, swallowed the dismissal. not anymore. In fact, we're thinking about moving in together after graduation. That was news to Ethan. We'd discussed it hypothetically, but hadn't made concrete plans. But I watched his eyes light up at the idea, saw him nod slightly. We'd talk about it properly later, but for now, I needed my family to understand. Ethan and I were serious. They couldn't dismiss this as a teenage fling. "You're only 19, Mom said sharply. "Don't you think that's a bit premature?" "You and Dad moved in together at 20, I pointed out. "You've told that story 100 times. "That was different. And how?" She didn't have an answer, at least not one she could say out loud. The real answer was, "Because you're you, and Mira is Mira, and we've already decided who deserves what in this family." The rest of dinner passed in tense civility. Mira barely ate, too busy glaring at me when she thought no one was looking. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She'd underestimated me, assumed I'd stay the same passive, easily manipulated younger sister. She'd thought she'd have time to work her usual magic. As we were leaving, Mira caught my arm in the hallway while Ethan was thanking my parents for dinner. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she hissed, her perfect facade cracking. "But it won't work. You're not good enough for someone like him. You never were." I smiled at her, and I let her see everything in that smile. The knowledge of what she'd done in another life, the certainty of my victory, the satisfaction of having already won. "Maybe in another life," I said quietly, "but not this one." Her eyes widened, confusion flashing across her face, but Ethan was calling for me, and I turned away, leaving her standing there with her mouth open. In the car, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your family is horrible," I supplied. I was going to say challenging, but yeah, horrible works too. He reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Lily. I knew you said it was bad, but I didn't realize." "It's okay," I said, and meant it. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be used to it." His jaw clenched. "The way your mother talked to you about you? And that comment your dad made about giving it time? Like we're some kind of phase?" "I know. And your sister." He shook his head. "There's something off there, the way she kept looking at you, at me. Like she was planning something." My brilliant, perceptive boyfriend. He'd seen it too then. Good. That would make what came next easier. "She probably is," I admitted. "Mira's used to getting what she wants. She doesn't like that I have something she doesn't." "She can't have you," Ethan said fiercely, pulling into my dorm parking lot and turning to face me. "I'm not interested in her, Lily. I never will be. You know that, right?" I did know. That was the beautiful thing about this second chance. I'd learned from my mistakes. I'd built this relationship on honesty and trust. I'd been authentic with Ethan in a way I'd been too afraid to be in my first life. He knew me now, really knew me. My quirks, my ambitions, my fears, my strange sense of humor. He'd chosen me with full information. Mira couldn't manipulate what she couldn't access. "I know," I said, leaning over to kiss him. "I trust you." And I did. But I also knew my sister, and I knew what was coming. The attack began exactly 1 week later, right on schedule. I'd known it would. Mira had never been patient, and her ego couldn't handle seeing me happy while she felt threatened. It started with social media. She posted a photo of herself wearing a dress I'd bought with the caption, "So grateful for my generous sister who lets me borrow anything. Family is everything." To most people, it would seem sweet. But I saw the subtext immediately, just as I had in my first life. I have access to Lily's things, to her life. I'm close to her. The next day, she showed up at my dorm, unannounced. "Sister bonding time," she announced brightly, barging past me into my room. Her eyes swept the space, cataloging everything, looking for opportunities, weaknesses, access points. "What do you want, Mira?" I asked, not bothering to hide my exhaustion. In my first life, I'd been so desperate for her approval that I'd welcomed these invasions, hoped each time that maybe this would be when she'd finally be kind to me. "Can't I just want to spend time with my little sister?" She sat on my bed, patted the space next to her. "I feel like we've been distant lately." "We've always been distant." "Don't be dramatic." She pulled out her phone, started scrolling. "So, Ethan seems nice, really nice. How did you two actually meet? I mean, really, you can tell me. And there it was. The fishing expedition. She wanted details, ammunition, some way to insert herself into the story of us. At a mixer, like he said. But what did you talk about? What was your opening line? Come on, Lily, share with your big sister. Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. I want to help you. Make sure you don't screw this up. In my first life, I'd told her everything. Every detail, every inside joke, every meaningful moment, every vulnerability. I'd thought she was genuinely interested, genuinely trying to bond. I'd essentially handed her the blueprint for how to replace me. We talked about code, I said flatly. It was boring. You wouldn't be interested. Her smile tightened. Try me. We discussed the elegance of recursive algorithms versus iterative solutions and why certain sorting algorithms perform better with specific data structures. I watched her eyes glaze over. Then we got into a debate about whether P equals sign NP is solvable in our lifetime and the implications for cryptography if it is. Oh, she said, deflating slightly. That does sound technical. Told you. I stood up, making it clear I wanted her to leave. Was there something specific you needed? I have a project due. She stood too, but slowly, her eyes calculating. Actually, I was thinking we should all hang out together sometime. You, me, Ethan. Maybe we could double date? I've been seeing someone new. Lie. She wasn't seeing anyone. This was a ploy to insert herself into my relationship, to have access to Ethan, to start building her own narrative. Maybe, I said noncommittally. We'll see. After she left, I texted Ethan. Mira's making her move. Be prepared. His response was immediate. For what? She'll try to accidentally run into you. Ask you for help with something. Establish a connection separate from me. Just remember, anything she tells you, I told you first. Lily, you're kind of freaking me out. I called him instead of texting back. I know it sounds paranoid, I said when he answered, but I know my sister. She's done this before. In another life, I didn't say. She sees you as a prize, and she can't stand that I have you. What has she done before? He asked carefully. And this was the delicate part. I couldn't tell him about my rebirth. He'd think I was insane. But I could tell him about patterns, about the past that was this present life's history. She's stolen boyfriends before, I said, which was technically true. In my first life, Mira had pursued guys I liked since we were in high school, just to prove she could take them from me. She pretends to befriend them, then manufacture situations where I look bad and she looks good. She's really good at it. That's disturbing. Yeah, I paused. I'm not asking you to be mean to her, just be aware. Don't be alone with her if you can help it. Don't tell her things about us that I haven't already told you myself. And if she says something about me that seems out of character, ask me about it first. Of course I'd ask you, he said, sounding almost offended that I'd suggest otherwise. Lily, I'm on your side, always. Those words hit me harder than they should have. In my first life, no one had been on my side. Not really, not when it mattered. Thank you, I whispered. Hey, he said softly, I love you. Your sister can't change that. But she would try. God, she would try. The campaign intensified over the next month. Mira was relentless, and I had to admit, watching her deploy the same tactics I remembered, knowing they wouldn't work this time, was almost satisfying. She accidentally showed up at the campus coffee shop where she knew Ethan and I studied together, claimed she'd heard it had great chai lattes. She made a big show of greeting me, then turned to Ethan with wide, innocent eyes. You must be Ethan. I've heard so much about you. Lily's so lucky. Ethan was polite but distant. Nice to see you again, Mira. She lingered, tried to sit with us, but Ethan was having none of it. Actually, we're working on something pretty technical, he said smoothly. Lily's helping me debug a neural network architecture. Probably pretty boring for anyone not in CS. Oh, I don't mind. We really need to focus, I said, not unkindly but firmly. Maybe another time. She left, but I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. Next, she tried the concerned sister routine. She called Mom and Dad, told them she was worried about me, that I was obsessed with Ethan. that it wasn't healthy, that I was neglecting my studies and my family. She provided as evidence the fact that I wasn't coming home for Sunday dinners anymore, conveniently leaving out that I'd stopped attending because they'd spent every dinner comparing me unfavorably to her. Mom called me, her voice tight with disapproval. "Your sister is concerned about you." "Mira is concerned about herself," I corrected. "She doesn't like that I'm not available to be her emotional punching bag anymore." "That's a cruel thing to say about your sister." "Is it cruel if it's true?" I asked. "Mom, when was the last time you asked me about my life without it being a comparison to Mira? When was the last time you celebrated my achievements without qualifying them?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "I love you, Mom, but I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you and Mira warm." I hung up before she could respond. It felt both terrifying and liberating. Ethan, when I told him about the call, just held me. "You did the right thing," he murmured into my hair. "Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's self-preservation." But Mira wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next escalation came when she somehow got Ethan's phone number, probably from Mom, who'd saved it after our disastrous dinner. She started texting him. Nothing overtly flirtatious at first, just friendly messages. "Hey, it's Lily's sister. She mentioned you like this band. Thought you might enjoy this song." Or saw this meme and thought of that story Lily told me about your coding competition, lol. Ethan showed me every message. We'd screenshot them, laugh about how transparent she was being. He never responded to most of them, and when he did, it was brief and polite, always finding a way to loop me into the conversation. "That's funny, I'll show Lily." Or, "You should send that to Lily, she'd love it." It was driving her crazy. I could tell by the increasing frequency and desperation of her attempts. Then came the party. One of Ethan's friends was throwing a birthday party at his apartment off campus. Ethan invited me, obviously, but I was battling a migraine that day, something I'd been prone to since childhood. I'd taken medication but needed to lie down in a dark room for a few hours. "Stay home," Ethan had said, kissing my forehead. "Rest. I'll stop by for an hour, make an appearance, and then come back to take care of you." "You don't have to." "I want to," he'd insisted. "Besides, Jake's parties are always too loud. I'll use you as my excuse to leave early." I'd agreed, grateful. But as I lay in my darkened dorm room, a sense of unease crept over me. In my first life, there had been a party. The party where Mira had shown Ethan those fake screenshots, had convinced him I was using him. It had been the beginning of the end. I checked my phone. Saw that Mira had posted an Instagram story. A selfie of her getting ready, captioned "Party time." My blood ran cold. I forced myself up despite the pounding in my head, texted Ethan, "What's Jake's address?" "Why? I thought you were resting." "I am. Just want to have it in case I feel better." He sent it along with a string of heart emojis and instructions to stay horizontal. I pulled on clothes, swallowed more pain medication, and called an Uber. I arrived at the party to find it in full swing. Music blasting, people everywhere, the air thick with vape smoke and cheap beer. I pushed through the crowd looking for Ethan or Mira, my heart pounding. I found them on the back patio. Mira had cornered him, was standing too close, her hand on his arm. She was talking rapidly, showing him something on her phone. Even from here, I could see Ethan's body language. Uncomfortable, leaning away, trying to create distance. I walked up behind Mira, looked over her shoulder at her phone screen. Screenshots. Of course, but these weren't fake texts from me. She'd learned from what I'd told Ethan, knew that wouldn't work. No, these were allegedly from her phone, showing texts from a number she claimed was mine, but wasn't, where I talked about Ethan in cold, calculating terms. About his family's money, his connections, how dating him was a strategic move for my career. It was almost impressive how much effort she'd put into this. "That's not my number," I said calmly. They both spun around. Mira's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Surprise, panic, anger, then settling on fake concern. "Lily, I thought you weren't feeling well." I wasn't, but I had a feeling I should be here. I held out my hand to Ethan. "Can I see your phone for a second?" He handed it over without hesitation, his expression dark. He'd seen through it, I realized. Even before I'd shown up, he'd been seeing through her. I opened his texts, found my contact, held my phone up next to his so he could see. This is my number, see? Then I pointed at Mira's screenshots. That number is different. Ethan's jaw clenched as he compared them. The numbers were similar. Mira had been clever, changed only 2 digits. But they definitely weren't the same. Mira, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What the hell is this? I must have saved a wrong number when, she stammered, her eyes wide. I thought, someone must be impersonating Lily. I was trying to warn you. Bullshit, I said flatly. You created a fake contact and texted yourself. You've done this before. In another life, I didn't add. You can't stand that Ethan chose me, so you're trying to sabotage us. That's insane, Mira hissed, dropping the innocent act, her face contorting with rage. You're paranoid, Lily. You always have been. You think everyone's out to get you. Not everyone, I interrupted, just you. A crowd had gathered now, people sensing drama and gravitating toward it. I saw some of them recording on their phones. Good, let them. Let there be evidence. Why would I do that? Mira demanded, playing to the audience now. You're my sister. I love you. Do you? I asked. Because you've never acted like it. You've spent our entire lives trying to take everything from me. Every friend, every achievement, every opportunity. You can't bear for me to have something you don't. That's not true. You stole my chemistry notes in 10th grade and claimed my research project as your own, I said, my voice steady. In my first life, I'd never stood up to her like this. I'd swallowed every injustice, every theft, every betrayal. But I'd had 10 years in my first life, and then 10 years of memories to review after Rebirth, and I remembered everything. You told Mom I failed my driver's test when I passed, so she'd give you the car. You sabotaged my college applications by submitting the wrong documents. You forged my signature to steal my scholarship money freshman year. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mira said, but her voice was shaking now. You're making this up. Am I? I pulled out my own phone, opened my photos. Over the past months, I'd been documenting everything. Every text from her, every voicemail, every financial record I could access. I'd known this confrontation was coming. I'd prepared. I have receipts, Mira, years of them. Her face went pale. Ethan was staring at me, shocked not by the accusations, but by the depth of the abuse, the systematic nature of it. Lily, why didn't you tell me all of this? Because I learned a long time ago that no one believes the victim, I said softly, not taking my eyes off Mira. They always believe the pretty, charming sister who plays the victim so well. I'm not playing, Mira started, but her voice cracked. You are, I said. You always have been. And maybe it worked on Mom and Dad. Maybe they're too invested in their golden child to see what you really are. But Ethan sees you. Everyone here sees you. I gestured to the crowd, to the phone still recording. You tried to frame me with fake evidence, Mira. That's not concern. That's not love. That's sabotage. She looked around at the watching faces, at the phones, and something in her snapped. You think you're so smart, she snarled, all pretense gone now. You think you've won? You're nothing, Lily. You've always been nothing. You're awkward and weird, and you don't know how to connect with people. The only reason Ethan's with you is because he hasn't figured out yet how much better he could do. Stop, Ethan said, his voice cutting through her tirade like a knife. I've heard enough. He turned to me, took my hands. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I knew your family was bad, but I didn't realize it was this bad. It's not your fault. I should have seen it sooner. The signs were all there. He glared at Mira. You need to leave, now. And if you ever contact me again or try anything like this again, I'm filing a harassment complaint. Mira's mouth opened and closed. She looked at the crowd, seemed to realize she'd lost and fled, shoving past people on her way out. The party slowly resumed, people drifting back to their conversations, though I could feel eyes on us, whispers starting. Ethan pulled me into a quiet corner. Are you okay? I've been better, I admitted. My headache was screaming now, and I felt shaky from adrenaline. But I'm glad it's out in the open. No more secrets. No more secrets, he agreed, then carefully. All that stuff you said about her sabotaging you over the years, that's all true? Every word. I can show you the evidence if you want. I believe you, he said immediately. I'm trying to process how you lived with that for so long. I didn't have a choice, I said simply. She's my sister. They're my family. You don't just walk away from family. Sometimes you should, he said grimly. Sometimes family is the most toxic thing in your life. He wasn't wrong, but there was something he didn't know, something I'd kept back. It was about to get worse before it got better. Because Mira, humiliated and angry, was going to strike back. Hard. The call came 2 days later. Mom's voice was ice cold. We need to talk. Family meeting Sunday. You will be there. Not a request, a command. I showed up to my parents' house alone. Ethan had offered to come, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to face myself. They were all there, Mom, Dad, and Mira, who looked like she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. The victim act in full force. Sit down, Lily, Dad said, his voice stern, and I sat, crossing my arm. What is this about? Your sister told us what happened at that party, Mom said. How you humiliated her in front of your boyfriend and his friends. How you accused her of terrible things. I didn't accuse her of anything that wasn't true, I said calmly. She tried to sabotage my relationship with fake evidence. I called her out on it. She was trying to help you, Mom snapped. She thought someone was impersonating you. That's a lie, Mom. The number she showed Ethan was deliberate. She created it specifically to frame me. You have no proof of that. Actually, I do. I pulled out my phone, showed them the screenshots I'd taken of Mira's evidence compared to my real number. See the difference? Dad squinted at it, frowned. That could be a mistake. It's not a mistake, it's a pattern. I looked at Mira, who was staring at her hands. How many times do I have to prove she's sabotaging me before you believe me? How much evidence do you need? We're not here to litigate the past, Dad said. We're here to discuss your behavior. My behavior? I laughed and it came out bitter. Mira tries to destroy my relationship and somehow I'm the one on trial? You've changed, Mom said. And there was something sad in her voice. Ever since you started dating that boy, you've become cruel, suspicious. You're pushing your family away. No, I said quietly. I've finally stopped letting you treat me like garbage. That's what's changed. The words hung in the air. Mira's eyes widened slightly. I'd never talked back like this before, not in this life. In my first life, I'd tried a few times, but I'd always crumbled under their united front, their gaslighting, their insistence that I was the problem. But I died once already. I had nothing left to lose. That's enough, Dad said sharply. We are not garbage, and we haven't treated you like garbage. We've given you everything, a home, an education, support. You've given Mira everything, I corrected. I've had to fight for scraps. And even then, she's tried to take those too. Because you're selfish, Mira burst out, tears streaming down her face now. You've always been selfish, always so focused on yourself, on being better than me. I'm not trying to be better than you, I said, exhausted. I'm just trying to exist without you destroying me. That's so dramatic. Is it? I stood up, faced them all. Let me ask you something. When was the last time any of you asked me how I was doing? Not as a prelude to comparing me to Mira, not as a setup for criticism, just genuinely asked. Silence. When was the last time you celebrated something I accomplished without qualifying it? When was the last time you took my side in a conflict with Mira? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered? More silence. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your love, I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts. And I finally realized I can't, because you've already decided who's worthy in this family, and it's not me. Lily, Mom started, but I held up my hand. I'm done, I said simply. I'm done trying to make you see me. I'm done letting Mira steal from me. I'm done with all of it. What does that mean? Dad asked. It means I'm not coming back here anymore. It means I'm not answering calls unless it's an emergency. It means I'm putting boundaries in place. And if you can't respect them, we're done. You're disowning us? Mom's voice was shrill with disbelief. I'm protecting myself, I said. There's a difference. I walked to the door, hand on the knob, when Mira's voice stopped me. "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you?" she said, venom dripping from every word. "You think that because you have a rich boyfriend, you don't need us anymore?" I turned back slowly. "This has nothing to do with Ethan. This is about years of abuse that I finally have the strength to walk away from." "Abuse?" she scoffed. "God, you're delusional. We're your family. Families tease each other, compete with each other. Families don't steal from each other. Families don't sabotage each other. Families don't gaslight each other." I met her eyes. "You're not a sister, Mira. You're a parasite." Her face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought she might actually hit me. But I didn't flinch. I'd seen worse from her in my first life. "Get out," Mom said coldly. "Get out of our house." "Gladly," I said, and left. I sat in my car for a long time afterwards, shaking. Not from fear or regret, but from the sheer relief of finally standing up for myself. My phone buzzed. "Ethan, how did it go?" "I'll tell you when I see you," I typed back. "But I think I just cut ties with my family." "Good," came his immediate response. "You deserve better. Come over. I'll order Thai food and we can watch that show you like." I drove to his apartment, and when he opened the door, he just pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being away from them, of being safe. "I'm proud of you," he murmured into my hair. "That took so much courage." "I should have done it years ago," I said. "You did it when you were ready. That's what matters." We ate pad thai on his couch, and I told him everything about the meeting, the accusations, my final words to them. He listened without interrupting, his arm around my shoulders, occasionally squeezing my hand. "So what happens now?" he asked when I finished. "Now?" I leaned into him. "Now I build a life that's actually mine. Not one where I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Mira to take something else. Not one where I'm trying to earn love that will never come." "Sounds like a good plan," he said softly. "And for what it's worth, you're not alone. You have me." "I know." I smiled up at him. "That's the difference this time." He gave me a curious look. "This time?" I froze for a moment. I'd almost said too much. "I just mean, I've never really stood up to them before. So this time, having support makes all the difference." He seemed to accept that, kissing my forehead. We settled in to watch TV, and for the first time in either of my lives, I felt truly at peace. But peace never lasts. Not when someone like Mira is involved. The harassment started small, anonymous texts from burner phones. Instagram accounts that would pop up just to leave nasty comments on my posts before disappearing. Someone egged my car. Someone else left threatening notes under my dorm room door. I knew it was Mira, even though I couldn't prove it. This was her MO when she didn't get her way, psychological warfare. Ethan wanted to go to campus security, to the police. But I hesitated. In my first life, when she'd really escalated, the authorities hadn't believed me. Mira was too good at covering her tracks, at maintaining deniability, but then she made a mistake. I got a call from my bank about suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to make a large transfer using my information. The security system had flagged it, but they needed me to confirm it wasn't legitimate. "Definitely not," I said, my heart pounding. "Can you tell me where the request came from?" "It looks like it was initiated online, but I can send you the IP address and login details." They did, and I stared at the information in disbelief. The login had come from my parents' house, from the IP address associated with their home network. Mira had tried to steal from me again, just like in my first life. But this time, there was a digital trail. This time, I had proof. I called Ethan first, my hands shaking with rage. "She tried to rob me," I said without preamble. "What?" I explained about the bank, the attempted transfer, the IP address. "She tried to steal $20,000 from my account. My scholarship money, my work savings, everything." "That's a felony," Ethan said grimly. "Lily, you have to go to the police. This isn't harassment anymore. This is wire fraud." He was right. I knew he was right. But the thought of pressing charges against my own sister, even knowing what she'd done, felt huge. Final. But then, I thought about my first life, about dying alone and broken because I'd never fought back, about all the times Mira had gotten away with it because I'd been too afraid, too hopeful that she'd change, too desperate for family acceptance. Okay, I said, let's do it. The police were surprisingly receptive. I had the bank records, the IP address, documentation of the attempted fraud. They interviewed me, took my statement, began an investigation. Then they went to talk to Mira. She denied everything, of course. Claimed someone must have hacked their Wi-Fi. Claimed she'd never do such a thing to her own sister, but the evidence was there and forensic analysis of her laptop would show she'd logged into my account. I knew it would because she'd done the same thing in my first life. Mom and Dad called me furious. How could you do this to your sister? Mom demanded. The police were here, Lily. They're treating her like a criminal. She is a criminal, I said flatly. She tried to steal from me. It was a misunderstanding. No, it was attempted theft, and I'm pressing charges. She's your sister. She stopped being my sister the moment she decided to destroy me, I said. Actions have consequences, Mom. Maybe if you'd taught her that years ago, we wouldn't be here. I hung up on her for the second time in my life. The investigation took weeks. During that time, Mira and my parents launched a full-scale campaign against me on social media. They painted me as vindictive, cruel, tearing apart my family over a mistake. Some people believed them, Mira's friends, family friends who'd only ever seen her charming side, but others didn't. People who'd been on the receiving end of her manipulations. People who'd witnessed the party confrontation. And Ethan's friends, who rallied around me, shared my side of the story, provided counter-narratives. The truth spread faster than the lies this time. Maybe because we lived in the age of receipts, of screenshots, of evidence. Maybe because I'd been smart enough to document everything. Or maybe because this time, I wasn't alone. Ethan never left my side. He hired a lawyer for me when the situation escalated. He stood beside me at the police station, held my hand during interviews, reminded me that I was doing the right thing when doubt crept in. You're saving yourself, he told me one night when I was particularly low. And maybe you're saving whoever else she would have victimized down the line. He was right. In my first life, after me, there had been others. Mira had moved on to new targets, new victims, leaving a trail of destruction. She'd never faced consequences, so she'd never stopped. This time would be different. The charges were formally filed 3 months after the incident. Wire fraud, identity theft, attempted theft of over $20,000. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the bank records and IP address, but forensic analysis of her devices showing she'd been in my accounts multiple times over the years, had forged documents, had engaged in a pattern of financial abuse. Everything I'd known she'd done but couldn't prove in my first life. Now it was all there, digital evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Mira took a plea deal, probation, community service, restitution, and a stay-away order. She'd avoid jail time, but she'd have a record. Her perfect image was shattered. Mom and Dad were devastated, but I felt nothing but relief. The monster who'd haunted both my lives finally faced consequences. And then, unexpectedly, things began to shift. Dad called me 6 months after the plea deal. His voice was tired, subdued. Can we talk in person? I almost said no, but something in his tone made me pause. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between campus and their house. He looked older than I remembered, more worn down. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. A massive one. I said nothing, waiting. After the charges, after everything came out, your mother and I started really looking at the history, at the patterns. And we realized. He ran a hand through his hair. We realized we failed you. Fundamentally, completely failed you. Yes, I said simply. You did. We thought we were being fair. We thought Mira just needed more help, more support, because she struggled more. But we were enabling her, letting her get away with things we never should have. And we were so focused on her that we didn't see how much we were neglecting you. Or how much she was hurting me, I added. He nodded, looking ashamed. She was in therapy now, court-ordered, and some things have come out about the extent of what she did. Things even we didn't know. Like what? Like that she's been sabotaging you since you were children, stealing your homework, breaking your toys, and blaming you, telling us lies about things you supposedly did. His voice cracked. She admitted to forging your signature on documents multiple times over the years, to stealing your scholarship money freshman year. We had no idea. We thought that was a processing error. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I tried to tell you, I said quietly. So many times. I know, and we didn't listen. We chose to believe her because it was easier than admitting we'd raised someone who could do those things. He met my eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know that might never come, but I wanted you to know that we see it now. We see you, and we're so, so sorry. It was more than I'd ever gotten in my first life. Hell, it was more than I'd expected in this one. What about Mom? I asked. He grimaced. She's struggling. This has broken something in her. The image she had of our family, of Mira, it's shattered. She's in therapy too, but she's not ready to face you yet. That's fair, I said. And it was. I wasn't sure I was ready to face her either. For what it's worth, Dad continued, you should be proud of yourself. You stood up for yourself when we failed to protect you. You're stronger than either of us ever realized. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We talked for another hour. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a beginning. When I told Ethan about it later, he held me while I cried again. Tears I didn't fully understand myself. Relief? Grief for what could have been? Joy at finally being seen? You okay? He asked when I'd calmed down. Yeah, I said and meant it. I think I'm actually okay. Life moved forward. I graduated with honors, got a job at a top tech company. Ethan and I moved in together like we'd planned. We adopted a cat. We talked about the future with an openness that still sometimes took my breath away. I saw Dad occasionally. Our relationship was tentative, rebuilding slowly. Mom I'd seen only once, at a supervised family therapy session that had been painful but necessary. She'd apologized, cried, admitted her failures. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Mira I never saw. The stay-away order saw to that. I heard through Dad that she'd moved to another state, was trying to start fresh. Part of me hoped she'd actually change. But mostly, I was just glad she was gone. 3 years after I'd cut ties with my family, Ethan proposed. We were hiking in the mountains at a vista point overlooking the city, and he got down on one knee with the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever met, he said, his eyes shining. You fought your way out of darkness and built yourself a life filled with light. I want to spend the rest of my life being part of that light. Will you marry me? I said yes through happy tears, and as he slipped the ring on my finger, I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Broken, alone, dying in that studio apartment with nothing and no one. She'd never believed she deserved this. Deserved love, happiness, a partnership with someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose her anyway. But I'd learned something in this second life. You don't wait for people to give you what you deserve. You fight for it. You set boundaries, demand respect, walk away from toxicity even when it wears a familiar face. So you save yourself, and when you do, when you finally build a life on your own terms, that's when the right people find you. That's when love becomes possible. Our wedding was small, a few close friends, Ethan's family, who'd welcomed me with open arms, and, to my surprise, my father, who walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Mom was there too, sitting in the back, and while we weren't close, seeing her there meant something. Mira wasn't invited. Didn't even know about it as far as I knew, and that was okay, better than okay. As I stood at the altar, looking into Ethan's eyes, I thought about the master plan I'd executed over these years. How I'd used my foreknowledge not just to protect my relationship with him, but to protect myself. How I documented everything, set boundaries, fought back against abuse I'd once thought was just my lot in life. How I'd chosen myself, finally, completely. The officiant pronounced us married. Ethan kissed me while our friends cheered. And in that moment, standing in a room full of people who actually loved me, chose me, supported me, I felt what I'd never felt in my first life. Complete. 5 years later, I sat in the nursery of the home Ethan and I had bought together, rocking our daughter to sleep. She had his eyes and my nose, and when she looked up at me with total trust and love, my heart felt so full it might burst. "You're going to have a different life than I did," I whispered to her. "You're going to grow up knowing you're loved unconditionally, that you don't have to fight for scraps of attention or approval, that your worth isn't determined by comparison to anyone else." She yawned, tiny fist curling against my chest. "And if anyone ever tries to treat you the way I was treated," I continued softly, "I'll teach you what I learned, that you have the power to walk away, to choose yourself, to build a life on your own terms." Ethan appeared in the doorway, smiling at us. "She asleep?" "Almost," I whispered back. He came over, kissed my forehead, then our daughter's. "I love you both so much." "We love you too," I said. And I meant it. This life, this beautiful, hard-won, chosen life, was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. Sometimes I still thought about my first life, about the girl who died alone and broken. But she wasn't me anymore. She was a ghost, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you don't fight for yourself. I'd been given a second chance, and I'd used it to rewrite not just my relationship with Ethan, but my entire existence. I'd cut out the toxicity, set boundaries, demanded respect, and built something beautiful from the ashes of what I'd lost. And now, watching my daughter sleep peacefully in her safe, warm nursery, in a house filled with love and laughter, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd won. Not just against Mira, though I had. Not just in keeping Ethan, though I had that too. But in the battle for my own soul, my own worth, my own right to happiness. I'd won myself back. And that, more than anything else, was the victory that mattered.